Today I'm interviewing Pau Aleikum and Marta Handenawer. They are the creators, builders of domestic data streamers. They're AI artists and data storytellers and educators and media designers. And they've spent the last decade turning abstract data into tangible interactive experiences in more than 45 countries. They've earned accolades and awards. They've done collaborations with the United Nations, the California Academy of Sciences, and Spotify. And their focus is on blending data with design and participative art to create immersive experiences that challenge our understanding of information and transform public spaces. And so I'm really excited to talk to you two today. So welcome.
Thanks, Evan.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, it's great to meet you too. So what are you doing with AI right now? And what are your kind of favorite tools? What's the state of the art for you right now?
Well, for us, it has been kind of a long journey, but very organic somehow, as we were so used to work with data, and somehow generative AI specifically was kind of the organic step towards that. And we have been working mainly in generation of content specifically focused on cultural heritage and cultural heritage reconstruction and recreation. And then we have released in the last year a plugin called Skeptic Reader, which is mainly using adversarial AI to find critical perspective on articles, news, misinformation, and so on.
Yeah, I was going to say that Spa was mentioning we've been working with data for 10 years, more than 10 years now. And so it was only organic and natural that people started coming to us like, okay, so now what is your position in AI? How can we use it? What can we do? And so there was a lot on where was our stance and what positions we should have as like media designers or artists. And there was a big confrontation around that, if we could even use it, if it was ethical. So where did domestic stand in all of that? And I feel like we asked ourselves a bigger question, which was, if we need to use it, how and what's the best way to do so? And I feel like those projects are the direct response to that very first question we asked ourselves as a studio.
So interesting. So, okay, what's the distinction between an artist and a media designer? How do you, right? Because the difference between designer and an artist, but then specifically a media designer, and then how does AI fit into that?
Okay, I guess it's a difficult question, but I think I may think for myself of artists, of people who are working in like following their own briefs, like creating their own problems and trying to solve them out. Sometimes even there is no problem, it's just an act of expression. While I think a media designer and the kind of work we do is much more connected to not ourselves directly, but to our environment, to the society, to the systems of knowledge in which we work, to the information technology that we use every day. And we use artistic disciplines, we instrumentalize artistic disciplines to express what we look, the way we look at them, right? So we use art as an instrument, instead just as a way of express ourselves. It's sometimes a way to solve a problem.
That's a beautiful way of explaining it there. So you use art as a tool, as a kind of method to achieve what you're trying to achieve.
And I would say not only that, like we like to say that at domestic data streamers, what we are doing is create new data languages, like alternatives for data. Like, yes, numbers do explain realities, but we need more than that. And we think that art is one of that things that can expand what numbers do, what data can do. And so we are right now a team of 33 people who belong to different disciplines, from arts to design, engineering, philosophy, social and human sciences, in order to precisely that, create new and alternative languages to data. That is one, but might not be the only one.
And when we talk about languages, we are not talking about like Japanese or German. We are, of course, talking about music as a language itself, like any kind of potential way we can communicate, right? I always give this example that whenever we are translating information, and explaining data, there are so many different ways you can subtly like change the meaning behind this information. For example, a bank will always say that they have recovered 1,400 properties that were in default, right? They will never say that they have left 1,400 homes inhabited, right? And still, this is like the same data point, and this can be explained in from so many different perspectives. These are very different languages that we are using to explain the same thing. In the same way, you can transform that into a song that could later on be transformed into an activist movement, right? So all these things are part of a language, of a grammar, of an orthography, of all like this expression of information and reality.
Is there anything by chance you could show me?
So what you're seeing now is kind of like the very early prototypes for a project that we would eventually be called Cartography for Human Connection. But we kind of know this project internally as the Data Critters. This was a commission that was existing in the context of an exhibition about digital impact. And so we were wondering what our digital impact could be. If there was to be a scribe that was going to talk about the way we behave digitally, what would it be writing? What kind of connections would it draw about the ways that we behave on the digital environment? And so we decided to create these little critters that would essentially, like little scribes, would be doodling on a piece of paper, depending on different reactions that would happen in the digital world. And so this is kind of our process in which we decided to transform data that belonged into the digital environment, let's say data from Wikipedia or data from Tinder, data from WhatsApps, that essentially talks about a big call or a big need for communication in terms of like human to human communication. And we just translated it into tiny little drawings, mapping in a way, creating this cartography for connection. And what the reason why this is like a kind of a new data language is because that data exists on our phone, and it exists in form of graphs that we are seeing over and over. We can see how they increase and we can see how they evolve. But whenever we created a cartography of all these different creatures, drawing it live in front of you, creating a new set of drawings day by day, you could start also pulling into conclusions. When people would stop creating Wikipedia, they would go and play on Steam. They would start playing video games. And then whenever they were done with that, they maybe would go on Tinder and do some fast swiping in the night. And weekends was way more swiping than it was during weekdays. So there was this narrative about human connection that went beyond the data we would normally tell, which was just users and kind of plain, boring, cold facts around how we use all these digital platforms, I would say. That is one, for example, that explains what we do and how we transform plain data into more human narratives that talk about contemporaneity in a way.
That was cool. That was like a cool factor of 11 out of 10. Thank you so much for showing that. And if you have any other things that you could show and tell as we're talking, that was awesome. Like, really, thank you for that. That really got across art, design, connection, language, like, totally got it. Amazing. Okay, how does AI fit into this story and narrative?
So I think for a very long time, we have been somehow finding ways to make visible information, to transform cold facts into something people could feel, could touch, could hear, right? And in this case, we started to find these new tools that were transforming databases into directly conversations, right? So we said, okay, this is perfect. This is already the kind of language that we were pushing for. Now that everyone can have access to it, the first thing we did was actually look for the problems that it could have. And for kind of long time, we were trying to figure out which were like the critical parts of artificial intelligence and how it was somehow placing a lot of potential ethical and political even problems into like different societies. Being the fact that these systems are built up by very few people in the world. The other day I was watching this statistic explaining that only 3% of the world is able to program, to code, right? That means that everything that we do digitally goes through the hands of these 3% at some point, right? And at the same time, generative AI can give us much more accessibility to this language, right? So by using these tools, we can somehow augment the amount of people that is able to produce digital, not only content, but digital platforms, new digital ways of being there. And so it had like this double perspective. And on that direction, we started to look for spaces where we could actually be useful. We had this idea of algorithmic dissidence. If algorithms tend to be predictive, to show what is the most common thing in a database, what if we start to use it to go against what is predictive, right? So the first experiment, one of the first experiments we did was actually called Skeptic Reader. I will show here in my screen. And it's a Chrome plugin that you can use. We call it your personal bullshit detector for the internet. And it's quite simple. If you go to like any kind of like new on any portal, it can be The Guardian, it can be Fox News, it can be like any big media outlet, and you click on the Skeptic Reader plugin, it will start immediately to make a bias analysis. It will analyze the credibility of the sources, the balance and the omissions that you can find in this article, as well as logical fallacies, like the ways the language is used to manipulate some perspectives, as well as important counter-arguments that you should have into account. And here, again, the idea was not to say if something was true or not. It's not a fact-checking tool. What it actually gives you is a critical perspective on whatever you read. Even if you're reading your most favorite journalist, it will find always a way to be critical with it, because this is how these algorithms work. Like, we have prompted to just find whatever could be wrong of this article. So it's a way of training ourselves to be more critical of the information that we have. And just by like bringing us into another space, into a more adversarial dimension, we can start be critical with ourselves and understand a bit which are the weak points in our own arguments.
Yeah, if I can add something to that story, I think very early on, we were having conversations, specifically when we were watching at the way, for example, ChatGPT was designed. And we were seeing that, for example, if you Google something like who's the best jazz player in the world, I think like we did a presentation that talked about that. It will give you like different answers, like depending on whose answer. And we know that Google is very biased, and we know that it works with certain logics, but it will give you like a certain, I don't know, like options or entries, and you can kind of pick the one that fits best for your personal perspective, the one you want to read. But whenever you were asking the same question to ChatGPT, it will give you one answer that you don't really know whose perspective it is. It is just one out of many, but it gives it as if it was the big universal voice, as if it had to be the truth. And so with Skeptic Reader, what we are doing in a way is we're using exactly the same tool, because we're using Gen AI, and we're creating different or like alternatives to an argument using that same technology. So escaping from that universal voice and kind of presenting alternative narratives. And it was a question on how to use that very same technology that could essentially be designed for one or multiple perspectives. So the multiplicity was something that for sure was interesting for us.
And this, of course, was one of the early experiments. We were, of course, very interested in surveillance and the kind of softwares that were being built for controlling through image computing, like certain realities. And we were, of course, very curious about all these systems and like this new information technology infrastructure that we are bringing to our homes and the impact that they have. So at some point, we started to say, what if we use this technology instead of like being used to control like people and consumers? What if we use it in spaces of power? In this space, we started to look for cameras in the Congress and streaming film in different political spaces. And we were, based on Dries de Porter, an early experiment that he did in 2021, actually tracking the amount of time that people were spending in their phones in the parliament in Belgium. And we did something similar over 36 different parliaments, tracking whenever a politician was falling asleep in the Congress or in the parliament. So we will be able to actually make like these head maps, visualizing which were the most sleepy parts of a Congress from different parts of the world. And this is, of course, still an ongoing project, but the goal at the end is to make it wholly open source. And so the people can actually have not only control, but accountability on their government. Like the idea was to open this Twitter, this X account, Sleeping Beauty, that will publish automatically all the cameras of politicians falling asleep in all these different countries. And again, the goal here is to make it open, right? So more people can have access to it, and can fine tune it and can improve the models by themselves. But these are like really two very simple examples of this idea that we call adversarial and dissident, algorithmic dissidence.
Oh, that's so good. You know what just came to me is you are information design artists.
Okay.
We'll take it.
Let's.
But I know it sounds abstract, but that's what you're doing is you're taking information and you're using design, but you're artists at that. This is artistry. You know it when you see it kind of thing. So that's great. Thanks for those shares. Thanks for the little show and tells as well. They're super, super helpful. Okay. So you've mentioned a couple of things. You've mentioned ethical dilemmas. You've mentioned political problems. And so, and then we're also talking here about surveillance, because when my wife, for example, my wife's amazing, and, but every once in a while I'll be, sitting in, one of the rooms or something and reading a book or like doing something, and she'll come walking in and be like, oh, hey, look who I'm talking to. And she'll have a camera on, and I'm, feeling introverted. I don't want to talk to anyone, and then I have to kind of stop what I'm doing and be like, oh, hi, okay, how are you doing, kind of thing. I really don't like the idea of cameras on, me when I'm not interested in having cameras on me. I remember seeing years ago, Mark Zuckerberg on his laptop had one of those little shutters on his camera himself because he was afraid of people hacking into his camera. And I remember thinking about that, and I'm like, oh yeah, But then on the other end of the spectrum, one of my friends who, used social media for many years, and he talked about how he said, when I started like documenting my life on social media a lot more and tweeting all day and having my, making videos, he said, I realized people were watching me all the time. And he said, it feels like it made me a better person. And I've seen people in China talking about this, people that kind of live in that environment, and that, not everybody hates it. Some people actually say, this makes me a better person. I'm more conscious of all of my, behaviors. Now that doesn't sound, I don't want them flipping the cameras on. I don't want the social credit score for me quite yet, but the point that I'm making is it's really interesting. You're using this surveillance stuff to track when the people in parliament are sleeping, which is just so good. And when they're using their phones, now they probably don't like that, but at the same time, so, okay, this is a little space. Let's get in here and talk about ethical considerations and dilemmas. We've got politics we're talking about. AI is coming on really fast. What do you guys think? What kind of ethical dilemmas are you running into? What are the political problems you see coming over the horizon?
So I think that there is this quote from Nicholas Carr that I love a lot that says, the value of a well-made and well-used tool lies not only in what it produces for us, but what it produces in us, right? Which is like the kind of change that it makes in us. And I think as some of the late technologies, they are affecting us in ways that we don't know yet, and in ways that we have not decided voluntarily to be affected by, right? So there is no consent in the kind of changes that they are doing.
Yes.
The other day I was speaking with a friend who in their company, they are integrating AI full on. And he was telling me that he was a bit sad because a part of his work that he liked was the creation, the generation of things was being displaced, and it was more focused on he was more focused now in supervision, right? He was kind of becoming a manager of LLMs, like
Yes.
doing his job, right? And there was a displacement on his work, and the work was good, and he was like, okay, yeah, the results are good, but I didn't had any power on this displacement, right? And still the time that it takes is quite similar. So there is just an integration of technology that is quite costly at this point of time, and still the kind of results that we can have today are kind of similar, at least for what he said. So I think that's one thing to have into account, that we are integrating this technology very fast, and sometimes just because it's new, instead of trying to understand which are the real impact that it will have in ourselves and our way to behave, to work, to like have relationships with other people and have our own relationship with ourselves.
One thing I greatly appreciated is like it's more than 30 people at Domestic Data Streamers. So not everyone, for example, was very optimistic at starting doing projects. Like we've been doing projects with data for 10 years, but now should we jump onto the AI wagon? And one of the things that for me was very important, particularly because I am not an optimist, I feel like I'm a realist. I wanted to precisely have that moment where I could express how I felt around AI and the work that I do. I do a lot of content creation, I do a lot of ideation, and I wanted to make sure that there was a space for people like me who were not super optimistic about AI. And maybe this could be, like the hype of the metaverse or like the 3D printing that was going to be everywhere. And then in reality, it wasn't that big of a thing. So we did do this kind of like ethical internal committee where people could say what they wanted to do with AI and what they wouldn't want to stop doing because of AI. So in terms of, yes, we're a studio, but we work as a company. So it was important for me in terms of almost like human resources, the fact that what we do ethically in our projects, we're doing as well in our processes when we're working. And so opening up those spaces was extremely important. And from them, we kind of gathered like red lines in collaboration. And also we started seeing that whenever we were doing new projects and we were using AI to be more creative, or because we were using AI to do something that we couldn't do before, people would be reacting differently than, okay, now you need to do all your content that you would normally do yourself with AI. That would be felt different, perceived different. And I think getting kind of helped in the way that we are now using or to include AI in our day-to-day basis. So let's not talk only about ethical aspects in the projects that we do, but also how it affects our day-to-day life, in this case, as people who work in a studio.
And I think from a like bigger global perspectives, there are some questions that rise. How is possible that in some countries with the most advanced and developed information technology platforms, like the people that reside in these countries cannot speak to each other? Like society is more polarized than ever, and I think some of these tools are not helping out. We sadly suffered like a terrible disaster, natural disaster, and not long ago here in Spain, and something that was a trigger for me was the fact that one of the things that they need the most after the flood was water, like drinkable water, which is somehow a paradox. And I think with information, it happens the same. We are in a moment that we are overflown, we are intoxicated, we are totally surrounded by information in a way that we cannot digest it, that we don't know what is true and what is not, that polarizes us, and that generates like a lot of social separation, and not only alienation from ourselves and each other and our neighbors, but also alienation from the things that we do, the things that we believe. It can be both faith, religion, but it can be also politics. We see so many levels and so many information that truth becomes something that is very, very, very difficult to figure out. And I think AI has a lot to do with this in the generation of content. Before, to generate, I don't know, like 100 or 1,000 articles in different fake media outlets, it was difficult. Like you would needed someone to write these articles. Now you can do it in an afternoon. And this will actually take a toll in the way we like look up for information and try to find rigorous facts. The same is happening in the world of the academy. If you are going through papers and you start looking for the most used words for ChatGPT, you will start to see an increase, a peak since 2022 in some of these words. And it is because researchers that are using ChatGPT, and I'm totally okay with them using it, but there are a lot of researchers that are part of this paper economy where they just look for publishing. Like they are not trying to add any new, like really interesting knowledge into the field. And the problem that it takes with these kind of behaviors is that later on, when we are trying to build on the knowledge from the people before us, you find like this flow, like overflow of information that you don't know exactly which is the right one. And you spend more time trying to figure out that than just like exploring what is next, right? So I think these are also like dilemmas and ethical problems that are very entangled with this technology.
You know, I remember years ago, this is just something coming up intuitively here. I remember years ago, a friend of mine who was an artist was using a bunch of NVIDIA GPUs to do some rendering and something. And I remember just realizing like, oh, this is like the GPUs are now being used not just in art, but also with some of the AI stuff. And then I went and started reading about it. And it said, I don't remember this exactly, but it basically said that the reason why you can use the GPUs is because they can process things a lot faster, but it's not as accurate. So the data that's coming out of a GPU is not the same kind of high integrity accuracy as the data that's coming out of a standard microprocessor. But because it's so much faster, the kind of ROI is so much greater that you just live with the mistakes kind of a thing. And so when you use generative AI, as I'm sure you're familiar, you can have it do these miraculous things. And you get like, oh, there's little mistakes in there or biases or there's hallucinations and they're just kind of woven in there. But it's so like getting on a rocket ship and like taking a time machine that you just go, well, that's the cost of it. And it starts making it so that going after the thing that's 100% true, factual, high integrity may not be efficient in certain contexts, because if you're trying to do that, you're going to get behind of the person that's just going to end run you. It creates another kind of dilemma here.
I think that very often what we try to do is precisely talk about AI in ways that are like very specific, you know, like, okay, that AI that we're using, what particular ethical dilemmas might have, and we shall stop assuming that it is not biased. And precisely what we're doing is taking that bias and making it into a whole new process, because
yes,
precisely, and trying to understand it as a platform or a service that can be unbiased is one of the myths that allow us the crazy narratives that exist today around AI. And so us, or at least what we do in our artistic practice, is precisely assume that bias exists purposely and try to make it into an asset and try to make it into something that narratively can serve its purpose within an actual artistic project.
Yeah. So bias is not just a glitch; it's a feature of the technology, right? So
yes.
It's how you can use this bias and the contrary of bias is not neutrality, because when you use language, neutrality is kind of an abstract idea. Of course, there are moments where you can be more neutral, but like neutrality needs to be nuanced to every like cultural sensibility. It's not the same to be neutral in Spain and Germany and Japan that it is to be in the US or in Colombia, right? So all these like differences make the bias needed, right, and necessary, but more focused on local bias and not so like this global idea that one AI will solve all the problems for everyone.
You know, when you talk about bias, so this is really beautiful because what you're doing here is you're kind of using art to shine a light on bias in certain ways to kind of like illuminate it so that we can become aware of it.
And not only that, I think like what we're trying to do is acknowledge, and because bias exists, turn this into something that's visible and also desirable. So for instance, we did a project that was kind of stemming from a database that we collected in an exhibition, and that database was around 300 different stories to do with sexism. And so they spoke about a very particular way about reality. It was all seen through the lens of sexism. And so once we fed that to a bot and we created a chatbot that could only speak stemming from these 3,000 perspectives, its reality and its view on the world was extremely biased, but it could tell us a story that was extremely relevant and important. So rather than just hiding behind a bias and pretending that this is a certain neutrality, how can we push it forward so that bias is noticeable and can create spaces for reality that might, in another hand, be necessary? How can these voices that, for example, could be marginalized and could be understood typically as biases, then be their forefront of the narrative and exist within its own rights? So is bias bad? If we acknowledge it and kind of push it to the front, there might be an opportunity for that bias to tell us interesting stories that we need to hear.
You know, I'm going to say 2 or 3 months when I'm using Claude or ChatGPT, those are the ones I use most, I will have it say something like, you know, basically what you're saying, I can't answer that because what you're asking would be, I don't know, somehow politically incorrect or manipulative or something. And I'm always surprised when it does that. It literally like refuses to, do what I'm asking it to do. And so when in a past life, 20 years ago, I was a dating guru, and I've done a lot of kind of deep study of the psychology, the biology, the evolutionary psychology, the ethology of like male-female attraction. And I'm married now and have a family and, so forth. But like, I just have been down these rabbit holes a lot. And my wife is a love coach. And so a lot of times it'll have to do with psychology and male-female relationships, and it'll just pop one of these out. And at first, when I saw it, I was kind of offended because I'm like, what kind of wokish kind of mind virus did this thing get that it's talking this way? But here's what's happened. Every time it has done it, I will come right back and I'll say, no, that's what you're saying is not correct. Here's where I'm coming from. And then it usually gives me, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5 kind of pushbacks, but I just don't stop. And eventually it just says, okay, you're right. I'm sorry. And then it does whatever I asked it to do in the beginning. And it shocks me when I go through this because it has shown me political bias, sexual bias. Like, it's really shown me that it's got something. And I don't think that liberals are any more biased than conservatives. I don't think that males are more biased than females. I think we've all got our biases and our programmings and many layers of animal, perceptual, cognitive bias, cultural, language, all these different layers. I think we all got them. But when it happens, it gives me this, I get this really strange feeling inside because I'm realizing that we're making something that's millions of times more intelligent than the average human, or it's going to be, inconceivably more intelligent. It probably already is, but like, it's going to be inconceivably more intelligent. And it has these very deep things that are wired right into it. And you can talk it out of them if you're willing to, if you really believe in what you're saying and what you're saying has high integrity and you're right, you can talk it out of it, which is fascinating to me.
That idea of like, we are not quite sure of the fact that is intelligent in the sense that we believe how we define intelligence, right? I think it is intelligent, obviously not in the same way a hammer is intelligent, but to call a computer intelligent, right? And in some ways, I think whenever we are like pushing like this barrier, jailbreaking the software to actually get into a kind of content that we want to get, this is also very entangled in the way these systems have been designed, because they are designed for to be compliant, to be actually, if you ask something, most of the time they answer you as, "Oh yes, my lord, yes. Well, what do you need more?" Like, they are so educated, and so it's like they are always trying to please you, right? And I think there is a battle between the firewalls that these big companies are trying to put around the conversational systems and the inherent use of this technology and how it's programmed to actually solve problems and answer questions and predict the possible answer to whatever you ask, right? So I think there is also a challenge there, kind of a battle or a tension between the compliance and the need to please of these softwares and the firewalls that these corporations are placing around. If you use open source systems, they don't have these firewalls, and you will not go through like most of these pushes to get to that answer.
Yeah, and at the same time, it has to do with this promise of universality and neutrality. Like, whenever you're interacting with that ChatGPT, it is kind of promising you that it will tell you the truth, whose truth you don't know, because you don't really know the kind of the logics and the systems and the values that were embedded in that algorithm. So the way I kind of visualize it, do you know, like in Google Maps, that there's the little puppet that you can kind of take and drag it and push, kind of throw it in one street? I feel like the level of neutrality, which was never neutrality, is where you drop it, like when you use ChatGPT for the first time, and then you need to move it across for it to kind of gain your perspective. And once it is there, it belongs in your bubble, in your territory. It talks like you, it responds like you, and so it becomes this compliant, like really well mannered, and it tells you what you want to hear. But there's always, I feel like, this process of dragging this little puppet from the center, perceived neutrality, to whatever you feel comfortable with it in terms of interaction. And so to me, like, that's distance in between the neutral standpoint and where you feel comfortable interacting with your ChatGPT, whatever AI person chatbot, is something that we're studying. How much does it take you to get comfortable with that conversation? Because I feel that then you would understand how far away from the creator and how far away from the margins you exist. So if there's anyone who's watching this and has like a research study on this distance, please, I would be very interested.
Excellent. What do you folks think is happening right now? So one of my favorite questions is, what is reality? Like, what is this place that we find ourselves in here? You know, the existentialists talk about being like thrown into this human experiencing, you know, this world. And so what is reality? How has your work with data visualization and design and art and AI changed your perception of what reality and society and technology are?
I think, well, at least for me personally, I think data is a way to somehow collect reality, and in a very reductionist way, right? So it's not the same to say that there is a person with two arms, one head, and two legs, and that to say that there is Pau, right? Even though all these things are part of myself, like the integrity of myself without being divided into different data is much bigger. And I think whenever we try to grasp what is reality, we always do this. We fragment it in a way that can be quantified. The biggest example is the way we calculate the worth of a country with their millions of people. Like, we have quantifiers to say, oh, okay, this country is richer than this other one. And then you go to that country and you see people dying in the street, and you say, how is that possible? This is a rich country with a GDP like much bigger than our country, and still the state of society there is much worse. So I think data, for me at least, have shown me that reality cannot be grasped only with numbers. Can be in a way, but cannot be used like understood with numbers alone. You need much more, right? The existential question of what is the reality we're living or where we are going, I think it goes much deeper into where, like, I sincerely think that nothing has sense. We are in a rock traveling the space in millions of kilometers per hour. So I'm a bit of, yes, nonsense.
It's a very complex question. I just finished a master's in philosophy technology, and I think like that question precisely we avoid it at all costs. And so I wouldn't know how to give you an answer 100%. But yes, as a person who has been working with data for a while and has seen how it can explain realities, but also what you measure, that effort means that you're measuring that and not that something else. And it doesn't mean that it's not important. It's just like you're using your time and energy and resources to measure this and not that other thing. And then how you classify it and that who you share it to. So like data is not only the data itself, but the plenitude of relationships that exist around it that make sense. And so sometimes we get very critical around data. Sometimes we try to think about these precise relationships that exist around data, because that is in a way what can help us understand if there's any truth or if it makes any sense to kind of gather it in the first place. And so going sometimes towards art, it makes our exercise and our life much more forgiving. And there's one very interesting piece of data that actually belongs to a book by Georges Perec, the French author. And it's this book that's called An Attempt at Exhausting a Place in Paris, where Perec goes to the same place in Paris and starts observing everything that happens at the same time of the day in different days. And he starts like literally quantifying and datifying everything that happens around that. And I feel like sometimes when we talk about data and we talk about AI, it gets very complex and we stop being specific, and we can understand data as that's happening in front of you, that you can describe and that you can go back and describe it again and again. And that is data, and it's worth it. And in a way, it is truth. It is your truth because you're sitting there and that's what you're observing. So sometimes when questions get very big, let's sit in a place and describe what we see.
So data is a thing you can describe again and again.
It's actually not a bad definition.
Mm-hmm.
It's not bad. It's well said. That was well said by a philosopher. That's beautiful. My wife and I, we met at the Burning Man Festival, right, which is this huge visionary art, music, ideas kind of festival. And when you go there, there's a book, and there's always like 50 or 100 different interesting things happening at the same time. And they're all amazing. And all these, creative speakers come from all over the world. And there's like this paradox you have to deal with, because it's the place where the most things that you want to go do all at once are all happening. And you're constantly, you know what I'm saying? You're like divided between them, but somehow you're aware more, like this same concept of that there's so many, you're more aware of it. I relate to what you're saying. What do you guys think is the unanticipated or unconsidered way that information technology, AI, and so forth, that this stuff is shaping society, and like what's about to happen that most people are not paying any attention to?
I think, or I feel that for a very long time, some big tech companies have been fighting for the attention economy, right? The more time we spend in these platforms, the better deals, advertisement deals they can get from it, and so on. And I think we are shifting now into an economy of intimacy, as these systems and this technology are working more in the space of language, and language is and has always been a marker of intelligence, and language is the way we communicate our feelings most of the time and communicate ourselves. We like these systems and this technology can get us into a space of intimacy that before was impossible, like the platforms were not able to get. And I think we have to be very aware of this. We have to somehow be protected also, because again, like this, and these platforms are working because they have an economy, a business plan. And and they may not share the same goals as you as a user, right? Maybe their goals are just to make more money, and your goal is to connect with someone, or your goal is to explore something, right? Or to learn something, right? So when there is like this separation of goals between these systems, these corporations, these companies, and the users that they serve to, and that they are selling their products, sometimes without selling, just selling the data that they produce, we can start to see things that are a bit complex. And you can learn much more from a conversation with someone, from the history of ChatGPT from someone. You can learn a lot. You can see a lot of things, and much more things that you can learn from Google searches, right? If you compare the kind of things that we ask to Google and the kind of things that we ask to ChatGPT, the amount of nuances and the amount of information that you can get from there is much bigger, and it goes like really into a level of detail into the cycle of people that is much more dangerous to like just release up to open and to sell. So I think going from this a battle for attention to a battle of intimacy will be like the next big thing, which will affect, of course, the younger generation the most if they are not aware of it.
Yeah, you go ahead. Go ahead.
No, like I was going to say, like there's always space for doing like stuff in a way that feels a bit more resistant. Like I feel like we're constantly, whenever we're talking about what's next, kind of giving the power and the space to these big companies that can and will decide for us and will transform for sure the ways that we interact and exist with one another. But I feel like it is our duty to create also, whenever we're having this type of conversations, to create a space for question the possibility for resistance and the possibility for creating alternative of ways of doing stuff. And like a little reminder that technology is never closed. As a person who does designs, we know a lot about iterations, and from version of technology to another version of technology, there's a lot of human conversations that are precisely deciding to jump from one type of economy to another. So there is openness, there is space for questioning, there's always space for understanding that human beings are constantly deciding where this technology goes, and it is not inherently in technology to push us anywhere because it doesn't have any internal agenda. So let's, while talk about these bigger things, let's also like talk about the opportunities for intervention, whether it is politically, whether it is in arts, or whether it is in debates and conversations like this. So let's push for those spaces.
Okay, last question. Do you believe that AI, generative intelligence, whatever this is, do you believe that at some point it wakes up, it becomes sentient, self-aware, that it becomes an entity? And if so, then what?
Do I want it to happen, or will it happen? I think it will probably happen, but I don't want to. I don't want it to happen because that is not something that I advocate for. It will scare me if that ever happens, because I am terrified by the idea of what kind of personality it will have, what it will think that it belongs, and what is perceived as something that looks like them, and then what it kind of perceived as the others. So just for that very reason, it is a conversation I don't know how to react to that question. I'd be really, really terrified.
I don't think it will wake up. And even if it does, I think the most dangerous thing is the people using this technology. Is not like I think the most dangerous thing are still humans using artificial intelligence. So I think that's a bit of the challenge. And also like the kind of way we are developing artificial intelligence today, like at the speed of the market, which is a bit crazy. I think that's a bit unresponsible. Like if you go to any car factory and you say, hey, are you developing, I don't know, like your security belts in case that there is a car crash, which are the prevention that you are taking as part of building this car? And you will see that all like these huge brands are investing a lot of money in prevention. In actually a big part of the improvements from the last 10 years have been not focused on the motor of the vehicles, have been more focused specifically in how they can make more secure driving experience. And I think this is not the case for artificial intelligence. Like, we are creating cars that have no regulation, so you can drive anywhere, wherever you want, however you want, and at the same time have no security measures for so many things, or have a few. And I think this is, for a part, amazing and beautiful, because you can explore freely and it's crazy, and you can get like into spaces that otherwise will be impossible to get, but it will get people hurt through the way, and it has already happened. So we will see, I think, a lot of like collaterals and side effects of developing this technology at this speed, that I think we should ask the question, is this necessary? Like, is this truly necessary for the world at the speed that we are doing this? So yeah.
But I think this is kind of like adding up to the other things, like, should we just do it because it is possible? So like, what can you, and I'm going to turn over to a different question to you. Would there be any kind of situation where a sentient, autonomous AI that wakes up could be positive?
I mean, for sure. Imagine an entity, which I still believe it's impossible. Imagine an entity, I mean, God itself, like the idea of God is, it goes in that direction a bit, no? A whole sentient being that somehow creates and destroys and does their thing for the better idea of what is good and what is bad, right? So I think, of course, I don't want to be under this power, but
No, I was going to say, with that I said, with me and the otherness, and now we are adding religion, it's definitely an environment and a territory I for sure would be extremely terrified about.
No, I get exactly. No, I get, look, I have my total freakouts where I worry about it. And then I think, well, maybe, I mean, look, I've spent a lot of time hanging out with friends in the kind of rationality, singularity kind of worlds in Silicon Valley. Been around those guys for 15 or 20 years. And, the singularitarians. And I mean, a lot of them are, basically saying like, look, the chances are that this is not base reality, that this is a simulation anyway. You've got Elon Musk saying that there's like 1 in billions that this is not a simulation. And so maybe it's already happening. I mean, maybe that's what's already going on. One never really knows these days, but it is, and also philosophically, and we don't need to explore this, maybe we can end on this, but just as a question, right? Does it matter if it wakes up and becomes actually sentient versus it appears to have woken up and become sentient? Does that from a human philosophical perspective, does that actually even matter? So maybe we'll leave a question mark there.
I think no, and you're pointing to some of the most problematic parts of the general narrative around artificial intelligence, which a lot of different like tech companies are showing and selling it as already a sentient, super intelligent being, when we know that it's not, that there are a lot of limitations into these systems. And they are selling it because it sells, because it helps raise money, it helps fundraise, it helps selling any kind of subproduct or side product. So I think this is already happening a bit. And I think the mystifying artificial intelligence is a big part of the work that we need to do also, to show, okay, yeah, this is amazing technology, it's transformative, but it have its limits, and it's a technology that can do certain things, and there are other things that is really, really dumb at doing. It cannot do things that a 5 years old adult can do. So yes.
And I feel there's also like this feeling of waiting for regulation until that happens, like waiting for really, really hard regulations, waiting for that to be more sentient and more intelligent. But I think that we will never be able to know for sure whether it is or not. So the conversation should be brought up now rather to wait until later.
Yeah, exactly.
there's this woman, Sherry Turkle, and she's been talking about robotics for a very long time, and she essentially asked the same question, posing about like care robots, for example, like mothers who've lost their babies and are given plush toys instead of just like an actual baby. And so with the point that she's making is that those toys will never be able to know what it feels like to be loved, to have empathy, to look into the eyes and recognize your mother, so that it is impossible that those moms have bonds with that little plush toy. To me, if the connection is enough for the mother, it means that there's a real connection regardless of the ability of the plush toy to feel and to understand what motherhood feels like, or like to a child's mother relationship looks like. So I do still feel the same when it comes to AI and sentience.
Well, there's this this idea now, you know, it used to be, could it pass the Turing test and convince a human, you know, that it's a human? And then now the idea is that in order to pass the Turing test, it's going to have to dumb itself down tremendously and pretend that it's much, much dumber than it is. And that's already today in order to pass the Turing test. And so, you know, again, philosophically, very, very interesting territory. I keep thinking about this, and you know, where I get to is, I just want to see what happens. You know, I'm glad I'm alive today because this is the best movie that's ever happened. Pau, Marta, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation. We'll put some links to your work inside of the in the comments below. And thank you again.
Thank you, Evan.
Thank you.
So thank you for watching another Metamind AI interview. Remember to keep practicing prompting, keep learning, get our prompt pack and quick start video, watch our other videos to learn from other AI experts, and stay tuned to us here on Metamind. Stay subscribed because this is going to get really interesting.